The grand hall of the Zirek Dominion was silent, except for the low hum of energy fields and the distant sound of marching soldiers. Alien nobles, cloaked in dark robes, stood in a circle around the raised throne. Their reptilian faces remained still, their glowing red eyes locked onto the center of the room. At the heart of the chamber, Princess Eliara of Mirani stood tall, her silver hair falling over her shoulders. She was the last heir of the Mirani people, a species known for their powerful telepathic abilities. The Zirak had taken her as a hostage years ago, keeping her as a symbol of their rule. If her people ever thought of rebellion, they needed only to remember their princess was a prisoner. Today was another day of reminders. Grand Warlord Karvos, the massive Zirak ruler, towered over her. His deep voice echoed through the chamber. The Mirani must continue to serve. You will tell your people to obey, or... Boom! A sudden explosion rocked the palace. The force shook the walls, and the red light of the alarm system flashed across the hall. The nobles gasped, their forked tongues flickering in surprise. The warlord's eyes narrowed. Then, before anyone could react, a figure stepped into the chamber. He wasn't Zirak. He wasn't Mirani. He was something else entirely, something unexpected. A human, dressed in a dark tactical suit, with a rifle slung across his back and a sidearm at his hip. Commander Ethan Vale stood at the entrance, his face calm despite the dozens of alien warriors surrounding him. He had dark brown hair, cut short, and sharp green eyes that scanned the room. His movements were precise, controlled, as if he already knew how this would end. The Zirak guards reached for their weapons. Ethan raised his own pistol and fired before they could react. 2 guards dropped instantly. The rest hesitated, not because they feared a human, but because they had never seen one move this fast. Princess Eliara's eyes widened. She had seen many creatures in her life, but none like him. She reached out with her telepathic powers, trying to read his thoughts, to understand who he was and why he was here. And then she gasped. Nothing. Her mind met silence. A void. An emptiness where there should have been thoughts, emotions, memories. Humans were supposed to be readable, but this one wasn't. It was as if he didn't exist in the mental plane at all. For the first time in her life, she felt fear. Ethan ignored the shocked looks and focused only on Eliara. He stepped forward, his voice casual but firm. You coming, or do you want to stay locked up forever? The Zirak warlord roared, his tail slamming against the ground. You dare, human. Do you know where you stand? Ethan didn't even look at him. He tilted his head toward Eliara. Eyes steady. You don't have a lot of time. Princess, decide. Eliara hesitated. She had spent years as a prisoner, always watched, always controlled. The Zirak had told her humans were weak, primitive, unworthy. But this one had walked into the heart of the Dominion's power alone, and he was winning. The guards finally broke free from their shock and raised their weapons. Ethan moved first. A single flick of his wrist, and he threw a small device to the floor. A blinding flash of light exploded outward. The nobles screamed. The Zirak warlord staggered back, and Eliara felt her senses scramble. When her vision returned, Ethan was already by her side, gripping her wrist. His touch was warm, real, alive. Time's up, he said. She made her choice. With a nod, she let him pull her forward. Together, they ran through the chaos, dodging energy blasts as the guards tried to recover. Ethan moved fast, weaving through the palace corridors like he had memorized them. How did you get in here? She asked breathlessly as they ran. I walked, he said with a smirk. She gave him a sharp look. That's impossible. So it is reading my mind, huh? She fell silent. He was right. Nothing about this should have been possible. And yet here they were. They reached a balcony overlooking the lower levels of the palace. A sleek black Terran dropship hovered just beyond, its ramp open and ready. More Zirak guards rushed in behind them. Ethan didn't slow down. He pulled a small grappling hook from his belt and shot it toward the ship. With a practiced motion, he grabbed Eliara by the waist. "Hold on," he said. She barely had time to react before they leaped into the air. The wind howled around them as the grappling line pulled them toward the dropship. Blaster shots zipped past, missing by inches. The second they landed inside, the ship's pilot, another human, yelled, "Strap in. We've got company." Ethan helped Eliara into a seat as the ship veered upward, escaping into the sky. The princess gripped the straps tightly, her heart racing. She turned to Ethan, her voice unsteady but filled with something new, curiosity. "Who are you?" Ethan leaned back, checking his weapon before flashing her a grin. "Commander Ethan Vale, Terran Vanguard." His green eyes locked onto hers. "And you're officially free." Outside the ship, Zirak warships began pursuit. The real battle was just beginning. The Terran dropship shook violently as it raced through the upper atmosphere. Bright red laser blasts from Zirak warships chased them, lighting up the night sky. The pilot, a short but sharp-looking woman named Riley, gritted her teeth as she steered the ship through dangerous turns. "Couldn't you have grabbed her a little quieter, Vale?" she shouted over the alarms. Ethan strapped himself in, his expression calm. "What's the fun in that?" Princess Eliara of Mirani sat across from him, still catching her breath. She had spent years trapped in the Zirak palace, watched every moment, always treated as a prisoner. And now, in a matter of minutes, she was free. Or at least she thought she was. She could still feel the Zirak presence chasing them. Even though she couldn't see their warships anymore, her telepathic senses screamed danger. The Dominion wouldn't let her go easily. Eliara turned to Ethan. "They'll never stop hunting me." Ethan simply loaded his weapon. Let them try. His confidence was unlike anything she had seen before. The Zirak were feared across the galaxy. Even the strongest warriors hesitated before challenging them. But this human, he didn't hesitate at all. She reached out again, attempting to read his thoughts. Maybe she could understand why he was so fearless. Nothing. It wasn't just that his mind was silent. It was like staring into an empty void. A wall of darkness she could never pass through. It was impossible. She had read thousands of minds before. Zirak warlords, Mirani elders, even criminals who tried to resist. But this human, he was unreadable. She shivered. "What are you?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "I could ask you the same thing, Princess." Eliara frowned. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. She was a royal. People bowed when they spoke to her. They feared her power. But this human, he acted like she was just another person. Before she could respond, Riley cursed from the cockpit. "We've got a problem." The ship lurched forward as something huge came into view. A massive Zirak war cruiser. It hovered in orbit like a monstrous beast, its weapons already charging. A direct hit from that ship would destroy them instantly. "They're trying to block our jump road," Riley yelled. Eliara's heart pounded. The Zirak were too fast. They had planned for this. They knew she would try to escape. She looked at Ethan. For the first time since he appeared in the throne room, doubt flickered across his face. He wasn't reckless. He understood the odds. But then he grinned. "All right, new plan," he said, unbuckling his seatbelt. "We go through." Riley stared at him. "Are you insane? That thing will blow us to dust." Ethan grabbed a control panel and started typing. "Not if we're faster." Eliara leaned forward. "Even if you try, their weapons will lock on before we can." Ethan smirked. "Who said we need to dodge?" A strange sound filled the ship. The engines roared louder than before, the lights flickered, and the entire ship shook as Ethan activated something deep within the system. Eliara sensed something change. The ship's energy shifted, but she didn't understand how. "What did you do?" she demanded. Ethan turned to Riley. "Full speed ahead. No turning back." Riley hesitated for half a second, then grinned. "You're crazy, Vale, and that's why it works." The dropship shot forward, straight at the Zurich cruiser. The warship opened fire. Blinding streaks of red plasma rained toward them. But instead of dodging, Riley pushed the thrusters to maximum. Eliura's stomach lurched as the ship accelerated beyond anything she had ever felt. The Zurich lasers missed, not because they were bad shots, but because their computers couldn't track something moving this fast. In seconds, the dropship shot past the cruiser, escaping into the darkness of space. The Zurich warlord on the enemy ship roared in frustration, slamming his fist against the control panel. Impossible. But it was too late. The Terran ship vanished into hyperspace. A moment of silence. The alarms faded. The shaking stopped. They were free. Ethan sat back in his seat, completely relaxed, like nothing had happened. Riley laughed breathlessly, shaking her head. Eliura, on the other hand, was speechless. No Zurich, no Mirani, no other species in the galaxy would have tried something so reckless. And survived. "You," she whispered. "You didn't even hesitate." Ethan turned to her, eyes calm. "Yeah, that's what humans do." Eliura stared at him, realization dawning in her mind. The Zurich always spoke of humanity as weak, insignificant. But she had seen the truth today. The Zurich didn't ignore humanity because they were weak. They ignored them because they were afraid. And now, Eliura understood why. The Terran dropship shot through hyperspace, leaving the Zurich war fleet far behind. Inside the ship, the hum of the engines filled the silence, steady and calming after the chaos of their escape. Princess Eliura of Mirani sat near the window, staring at the endless streaks of light outside. It still didn't feel real. Just hours ago, she had been a prisoner in the Zurich palace. Now she was sitting on a human ship, free for the first time in years. She turned her gaze toward Ethan Vale, the human who had changed everything. He sat across from her, casually checking his weapons, as if their escape had been nothing more than a simple mission. "You're reckless," Eliura said finally, breaking the silence. Ethan smirked without looking up. "And you're welcome." She frowned. That maneuver back there, flying straight into a warship, should have gotten us killed. Ethan leaned back in his seat. Yeah, but it didn't. His confidence irritated her. No Mirani or Zurich would have ever risked something like that. Humans were different. Too different. Eliura crossed her arms. "You planned all of this, didn't you? You knew exactly how they would react." Ethan finally met her gaze. "I had a pretty good guess." He tapped the side of his head. "See, that's the thing about your Zurich overlords. They think they've got it all figured out. They expect everyone to follow the rules they set." Eliura narrowed her eyes. "And humans don't." Ethan grinned. "Humans make their own rules." Before she could respond, Riley's voice crackled over the ship's intercom. Guys, we've got a problem." Ethan was on his feet instantly, moving toward the cockpit. Eliura followed. When they reached the control room, her heart dropped. The Zurich weren't finished with them yet. A hunter in the dark. A massive Zurich Hunter-class warship was following them through hyperspace, its crimson hull glowing in the void. It was smaller than the war cruiser they had escaped from, but faster and deadlier. "They must have tagged us with a tracker before we jumped," Riley said, gripping the controls tightly. "They're gaining on us." Eliura's stomach twisted. She had felt it. Back on the palace ship, she had sensed something reaching out, watching, tracking her. She should have known. Ethan studied the warship on the screen, his expression unreadable. Then he exhaled sharply. "All right. Looks like we do this the hard way." Riley groaned. Why is it always the hard way? Outrunning death. The Zurich warship opened fire. Bright red plasma streaked toward them. Riley yanked the controls, rolling the dropship in a desperate attempt to dodge. The energy blasts narrowly missed, shaking the ship violently. "Shields at 30%. Riley shouted. "We can't take another hit like that." Eliara clenched her fists. You can't outrun them, can you? Riley shook her head. Not for long. Ethan's face remained calm, but she could see the gears turning in his head. Thinking. Calculating. Then, suddenly, he smiled. Eliara had already learned something important about humans. When they smiled like that, it meant trouble. What? She asked suspiciously. Ethan turned to Riley. How close are we to the next planetary system? Riley checked the navigation. There's a gas giant nearby. A big one. Why? Ethan's smile widened. Because we're about to do something really stupid. The Storm Gambit. The Zirak warship closed the distance, its weapons charging for a final shot. Ethan leaned over Riley's seat, aimed straight for the gas giant. Riley's eyes widened. You want me to fly into a storm? Are you insane? Very, Ethan confirmed. Eliara's breath caught. The gas giant wasn't just any planet. It was a storm world, covered in massive electrical storms that could tear a ship apart in seconds. If we go in there, we'll be blind, she said. No sensors, no shields. But neither will they, Ethan interrupted. That ship's got better weapons, better speed. Only way we win is if we take away their advantage. Riley stared at the storm in the distance. It was suicide. But then she grinned. Let's do it. Into the chaos. The ship dived toward the gas giant, accelerating straight into the swirling clouds of fire and lightning. Eliara braced herself. The moment they entered, the ship lurched violently, hit by the storm's powerful winds. Lightning flashed all around them, lighting up the dark clouds like a battlefield. The Zirak ship followed. We lost our sensors. Riley yelled. I can't see a thing. Ethan was already moving. He grabbed a manual override system and activated a set of old-school analog readings. No fancy tech, he said. We do this by instinct. Eliara watched in amazement as the humans adapted instantly. Their technology had failed them, but instead of panicking, they adjusted. The Zirak weren't built for that. A sudden explosion rocked the sky behind them. The Zirak ship had been hit by a massive bolt of lightning. Riley whooped. That's what you get for playing by the rules. Eliara turned to Ethan. He had known this would happen. As the Zirak ship struggled to stabilize, Riley pulled the dropship out of the storm, flying low over the planet's surface. The enemy ship tried to follow, but another strike of lightning hit its engine. The last thing Eliara saw before they jumped to hyperspace was the Zirak warship spinning out of control, disappearing into the storm. The truth she couldn't ignore. Back in the safety of space, the ship was quiet again. Eliara exhaled slowly, her mind racing. You knew that storm would give us an advantage. You knew they wouldn't be able to adapt like you. Ethan didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice was calm. They're strong, but strength isn't everything. He leaned back, crossing his arms. Humans survive. That's what we do. Eliara looked at him, truly looked at him. For the first time, she understood. The Zirak hadn't ignored humanity because they were weak. They had ignored them because they were unpredictable. And that was the most dangerous thing in the universe. The Terran dropship glided through the vast emptiness of space, its engines humming softly. After escaping the Zirak warship in the storm, things had finally calmed down. But Eliara knew it wouldn't last. The Zirak never gave up. Princess Eliara of Mirani sat in the co-pilot's chair, watching the navigation screen. Ethan and Riley had chosen a new destination, an uncharted world hidden deep in the galactic fringe. Eliara turned to Ethan Vale. Where exactly are we going? Ethan didn't look away from the controls. Somewhere safe, for now. She frowned. I find it hard to believe any place is safe from the Zirak. Ethan smirked. That's because you've never been to Haven. Riley chuckled from the pilot's seat. You're gonna love it, princess. Or maybe hate it. Hard to say. Eliara didn't like the sound of that. A world off the grid. A few hours later, the ship dropped out of hyperspace. Eliura gasped. Before them stretched a hidden world, surrounded by thick asteroid fields and massive space wrecks. The planet itself was dark and covered in stormy clouds with golden lights flickering in the deep valleys. She could feel the presence of thousands of beings, all living in the shadows. Some were criminals, some were exiles, and some were fighters. "This isn't a normal colony," Eliura said slowly. Ethan grinned. "Nope. Welcome to Haven, home of every outlaw, rebel, and freedom fighter the galaxy forgot about." Riley maneuvered the ship carefully, weaving through the wreckage until they reached a hidden docking station built into the side of a canyon. As they landed, a group of heavily armed figures appeared, weapons at the ready. Ethan didn't seem worried. The ramp lowered, and he stepped out first. A tall, scared woman with a cybernetic arm greeted him with a smirk. "Vale, still alive, I see." Ethan grinned. "You know me, Jex. Too stubborn to die." Jex turned her sharp gaze toward Eliura. "And who's the royal?" Eliura straightened. She didn't like the way this woman looked at her, like she was a problem waiting to happen. Before she could speak, Ethan answered, "She's why we're here." Jex studied Eliura for a moment, then sighed. "Great. More trouble. The Resistance's secret." Eliura quickly realized Haven wasn't just a hideout. It was a base of operations. As they walked through the underground city, she saw soldiers training, engineers building weapons, and spies gathering intelligence. These weren't just criminals. These were people preparing for war. She turned to Ethan. "This is a resistance." Ethan nodded. "Not just against the Zirak. Against every empire that thinks they can control the galaxy." Eliura had spent her whole life under the rule of powerful empires. The Zirak, the Mirani Council, even her own people had played the game of politics and control. But this was different. Here, people weren't following orders from a throne. They were fighting for themselves. A dangerous offer. Inside a war room, Jex laid out a holographic map of Zirak-controlled space. She pointed to a heavily fortified outpost. "That's where they keep their high-value prisoners. Scientists, leaders, anyone they think is important." Eliura's heart skipped a beat. She knew this place. "My father is there," she whispered. The room fell silent. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Your father?" Eliura took a deep breath. "King Orlan of Mirani. The Zirak took him when they conquered our home. I thought he was dead." Jex crossed her arms. "Well, now you know where he is. But getting him out, that's a suicide mission." Ethan leaned forward. "Then we better make it count." Jex shot him an annoyed look. "You're serious?" Ethan smirked. "Always." Eliura stared at Ethan. Was he really willing to risk his life for this? She had met warriors before, proud generals, noble knights, but none of them were like him. Ethan didn't fight for a kingdom. He didn't fight for power. He fought because he chose to. The decision. That night, Eliura stood on a balcony overlooking the city. The hum of distant machinery filled the air. She knew she had a choice to make. She could leave, disappear into the galaxy, let the Resistance fight their own battles. Or she could stand and fight. Ethan walked up beside her. "You're thinking about running." Eliura didn't deny it. "I've spent my whole life being told what to do. Every choice was made for me. My fate was decided the day I was born." Ethan leaned against the railing. "And now?" She looked at him. "Now I have a choice." Ethan nodded. "Yeah. And that scares the Zirak more than anything." Eliura took a deep breath. For the first time in her life, she was in control. She turned back toward the war room. "Let's plan this mission." Ethan grinned. "Now you're talking." The underground base of Haven buzzed with quiet urgency. The war room was filled with holographic maps, schematics, and the murmurs of resistance fighters preparing for the most dangerous mission yet, breaking into the Zirak high-security prison to rescue King Orlan. Princess Aliera of Mirani stood beside Ethan Vale, her mind racing. This mission wasn't just about saving her father. It was about striking a blow against the Zirak Empire. Jex, the battle-hardened leader of Haven's resistance, crossed her arms. This place is a fortress. Guard towers, drone patrols, bioscanners. Even if you get past all that, there's no way out once they lock down the facility. Ethan smirked. Then we just have to make sure they don't lock it down. Jex sighed. You're insane. Ethan turned to Riley, their best pilot. How soon can you get us in? Riley grinned. I've got an old Zirak supply ship docked in the scrapyard. It still has clearance codes. If we disguise ourselves as a resupply team, we might slip through unnoticed. Eliara frowned. And if they check the ship? Riley winked. Then we improvise. Eliara wasn't sure she liked that plan. But there was no time for doubts. The mission was set. They would leave at dawn. A dangerous arrival. The stolen Zirak transport cruised toward the prison station, its dull metallic hull blending in with the other supply ships. Inside, Ethan, Eliara, and a small team of Haven fighters stood ready, dressed in stolen Zirak uniforms. Eliara's pulse quickened as the station came into view, a massive dark structure floating above a barren planet, surrounded by defense turrets and patrol ships. The radio crackled. Supply transport, transmit clearance codes. Riley, sitting in the pilot's seat, sent the stolen codes. A long silence followed. Eliara held her breath. Finally, the response came. Codes accepted. Proceed to docking Bay 3. Riley exhaled. See, easy. Eliara didn't relax. It was never that easy. Inside the lion's den, the ship docked smoothly. The team moved fast, stepping onto the cold steel floors of the station's loading bay. Armed Zirak guards stood nearby, watching. A Zirak officer approached, her yellow eyes narrowing. You are late. Ethan, playing his role, saluted sharply. Apologies, sir. Meteor storm delayed us. The officer grunted. Emph. Unload quickly. She turned away, motioning to her men. As soon as she was out of earshot, Ethan whispered, We're in. Breaking the chains. The team moved swiftly through the station's corridors. Eliara led the way. She had studied Zirak prisons before. Their structure, their security flaws. King Orlan would be in the lower detention block, deep underground. Ethan checked a stolen datapad. Security sweeps every 15 minutes. We need to be out before the next one. They reached the detention wing. The hall was quiet, except for a single Zirak guard standing watch. Eliara didn't hesitate. She moved fast, striking the guard's pressure points, knocking him out before he could react. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Remind me never to make you mad. Eliara ignored him and accessed the prisoner logs. Cell 47. This way. They hurried down the corridor, past rows of locked cells filled with captives. Alien prisoners, political enemies, forgotten warriors. And then they found him. Father and daughter. King Orlan of Mirani sat against the cold wall, his once golden robes now torn and faded. But when he looked up and saw Eliara, his eyes filled with shock. Eliara. His voice was weak but full of emotion. She rushed to the control panel and unlocked the cell. The door slid open, and she fell to her knees beside him. You're alive, she whispered. He touched her face gently, as if making sure she was real. And you've come for me. Ethan knelt beside them. We don't have time for a reunion, Your Highness. Can you walk? Orlan nodded slowly. With a little help. Ethan and Eliara helped him up. Then the alarm blared. The escape turns deadly. Riley's voice came through the comms. You guys tripped something. The whole station's locking down. Ethan cursed. Of course we did. A squad of Zirak guards rounded the corner, weapons raised. Eliara grabbed a fallen guard's blaster. "We fight our way out." Ethan grinned. "Now you're talking." Blaster fire erupted through the hall as the team pushed forward, covering King Orlan as they fought toward the exit. Ethan shot out a security panel, sealing the blast doors behind them. Riley's voice came again. "I've got the ship ready, but you need to move. Now." They raced toward the docking bay, alarms screeching, enemy forces closing in. Just a little farther. A desperate leap. The docking bay doors opened. Their stolen ship sat waiting. Guards flooded the hangar, firing relentlessly. Eliara felt something shift inside her. Not fear, but purpose. She covered Ethan as he helped Orlan up the ramp. Then she turned and fired one last shot, hitting a fuel pipe behind the Zurek troops. Boom! The explosion sent shockwaves through the hangar. Eliara ran. The ramp began to close. Ethan grabbed her hand and pulled her inside just before the doors sealed shut. Freedom. For now. The ship blasted away from the prison, dodging incoming fire. Riley pushed the engines to their limit. "Hold on." The ship jumped to hyperspace. A moment of silence followed. Then, relief. Eliara turned to her father, emotions overwhelming her. "You're safe now." Orlan smiled weakly. "Because of you." Ethan leaned against the wall, catching his breath. "That was fun." Riley snorted. "You call that fun?" Ethan smirked. "Yeah, and we're just getting started." The stolen Zurek transport shot through hyperspace, its engines humming with strain. Inside, the crew barely had time to catch their breath. The mission had been a success. They had rescued King Orlan, but the hardest part was yet to come. Because the Zurek Empire never let anyone escape. A moment of relief. Princess Eliara of Mirani sat beside her father in the ship's medbay. King Orlan's face was tired, his once strong form weakened by months of captivity, but his spirit was unbroken. He looked at his daughter, pride in his eyes. "You've changed," he said softly. Eliara held his hand. "War does that." His gaze flickered to Ethan Vale, who stood near the door. "And who is this?" Ethan smirked. "Just a guy who doesn't like empires telling people what to do." Orlan studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Then you and I agree on something." Before they could speak further, Riley's voice echoed through the ship. "We've got a problem." The Zurek response. Eliara rushed to the cockpit. Outside, hyperspace stretched in an endless tunnel of light, but something was wrong. The warning lights on the console were flashing red. Riley cursed. "The Zurek put a tracking beacon on our ship. The moment we drop out of hyperspace, they'll be on us." Eliara's heart pounded. "Can we remove it?" Ethan shook his head. "Not while we're moving. We'd have to land somewhere." Jex, their resistance contact from Haven, appeared on the comms. "I know a place. There's an old abandoned asteroid base nearby. If you can make it there, you might have time to rip out the tracker before they catch up." Riley adjusted course. "Hold on. This is gonna be rough." Crash landing on the asteroid. The ship dropped out of hyperspace near a massive asteroid field. The base Jex mentioned was carved into the side of a giant, jagged rock, its metal structure barely visible in the darkness. The ship shook violently as they entered the asteroid's thin atmosphere. The tracking beacon's signal pulsed. The Zurek were already searching for them. "Landing now," Riley shouted. The ship skidded across the dusty surface, barely managing to stop before slamming into a rock wall. "Everybody out," Ethan yelled. They scrambled out of the ship, scanning the skies. No Zurek ships yet, but they wouldn't be far behind. Racing against time, Ethan and Riley ran to the underside of the ship, searching for the beacon. Eliara helped her father into the base's dark corridors. The old station was cold, empty, abandoned for years. Rusted consoles lined the walls, and the air smelled of stale metal. Orlan coughed. "We're not safe here, are we?" Eliara shook her head. Not for long. A loud beeping sound filled the air. Riley shouted from outside. Found the tracker. But it's wired into the ship's core. If we rip it out, the whole engine could shut down. Ethan clenched his jaw. We don't have a choice. Eliara turned to her father. We have to move deeper into the base. If the Zirek find us, we need cover. Orlan nodded. Then let's go. The Zirek arrive. The moment Ethan yanked the tracker free, the warning lights on the ship flickered and died. And then, above them, a Zirek warship dropped out of hyperspace. Riley's face went pale. They're here. Eliara's heart raced as drop pods launched from the Zirek ship, streaking toward the asteroid. Ethan grabbed his rifle. Looks like we're fighting. A desperate battle. The first Zirek soldiers landed near the base entrance, their reptilian armor gleaming in the dim light. They raised plasma rifles and opened fire. Ethan, Eliara, and the others took cover behind broken machinery, returning fire. Blaster shots lit up the dark corridors. Eliara moved with precision, her shots striking true. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She was a warrior. King Orlan, despite his weakness, picked up a fallen soldier's weapon. I may be old, but I am still Mirani. Ethan grinned. Now that's the spirit. A risky plan. More Zirek landed, their numbers growing. The resistance fighters were skilled, but they were outgunned. Ethan turned to Riley. Can you get the ship running? Riley shook her head. Not fast enough. Eliara made a decision. Then we don't run. We use the station's old defense cannons. Jex's voice crackled over the comms. You sure? Those things haven't worked in years. Eliara narrowed her eyes. Then we fixed them. Turning the tide. She and Ethan raced through the base's control room, activating the old systems. Riley worked frantically to bring the ship back online. Outside, the Zirek forces pushed forward, closing in. Eliara's fingers flew over the rusted console, rerouting power. The cannons powered up, glowing with new life. Ethan grinned. Now let's see if these old guns still work. The station's turrets roared to life, blasting the Zirek dropships. Explosions lit up the sky as the enemy forces fell into chaos. Escape, for now. With the enemy distracted, Riley brought the ship back online. Get in, now, she shouted. Ethan and Eliara ran to the ramp, covering their retreat. King Orlan hesitated for a brief moment, looking back at the burning battlefield. Then he turned and stepped onto the ship. As soon as they were aboard, Riley hit the engines. The ship blasted off, dodging the last enemy shots. The Zirek warship loomed behind them, but it was too late. The stolen ship jumped to hyperspace. A new hope. The crew sat in silence, catching their breath. King Orlan looked at his daughter. You are more than I ever imagined, Eliara. She met his gaze. I am who I need to be. Ethan grinned. Well, I don't know about you, but I say we celebrate surviving another day. Riley chuckled. Yeah, let's not make this a habit. Eliara looked out at the stars. The fight wasn't over. But for the first time, she felt something powerful. Hope. The stolen ship drifted through hyperspace, its engines humming softly. The battle on the asteroid had left its mark. Burnt hull plating, damaged systems, and exhausted fighters. But they had won for now. Princess Eliara of Mirani sat in the cockpit, staring at the endless tunnel of light outside. They had rescued her father, escaped the Zirek, and survived. But deep down, she knew the war was far from over. Ethan Vale entered the cockpit, arms crossed. We're not safe yet. Eliara nodded. I know. The Zirek will never stop hunting us. Ethan leaned against the wall. Then maybe it's time we stop running. Eliara turned to him, a new fire in her eyes. He was right. They had been on the defensive for too long. It was time to strike back. A bold plan. King Orlan of Mirani sat in the medbay, regaining his strength. He was weak, but his mind was sharp. When Iliara told him her plan, he listened carefully. She pointed at the holographic map. The Zirak war machine is strong because of their command network. If we take out their central relay station, we cripple their fleet. Jex, the battle-hardened resistance leader, studied the map. You're talking about the Zirak communications hub on Ralvik 9. That place is a fortress. Ethan grinned. Good. That means they won't expect an attack. Riley, the pilot, whistled. You're all crazy. I love it. King Orlan nodded slowly. It is dangerous, but necessary. If we succeed, we give the entire galaxy a chance to fight back. Iliara clenched her fists. This was it. The moment they stopped being hunted and became the hunters. Approaching the target, the ship dropped out of hyperspace, arriving near Ralvik 9, a cold, rocky moon orbiting a dying star. The Zirak relay station stood tall on its surface, protected by turrets, shields, and patrol ships. Riley kept the ship hidden behind a nearby asteroid. No way we're flying in without getting shot to pieces. Ethan smirked. Then we sneak in. The infiltration begins. Disguised in stolen Zirak armor, Iliara, Ethan, and Jex boarded a cargo hauler bound for the station. The moment they landed, they moved fast. Inside the station, Zirak officers monitored data streams, coordinating their Empire's fleet. Jex whispered, "Once we plant the charges, we have 5 minutes before the whole place goes up." Ethan grinned. Plenty of time. But then, the alarms blared. A Zirak commander stepped into the control room, his golden eyes locking onto Iliara. "You." His voice was filled with shock and rage. Iliara's cover was blown. The battle begins. The Zirak soldiers opened fire. Ethan and Jex dove for cover, returning shots with precision. The control room exploded into chaos. Iliara grabbed a fallen soldier's weapon and fought her way toward the main terminal. If they couldn't destroy the station, they could at least send a message. She activated the comms and broadcasted a signal across the Zirak Empire. "This is Princess Iliara of Mirani. The Zirak Empire is not invincible. The resistance is rising, and we will not stop until the galaxy is free." Destroying the relay, Jex planted the explosive charges along the station's power core. Ethan covered their escape, his blaster cutting down enemy guards. The countdown had begun. 5 minutes. The team raced toward the landing bay, but more Zirak soldiers blocked the exit. King Orlan's voice crackled through their earpieces. "Fall back to the western platform. I have a plan." Iliara didn't hesitate. They ran. A father's sacrifice. The western platform was open to the harsh winds of Ralvik 9. Their ship hovered nearby, weapons primed. But the Zirak were closing in. King Orlan stood at an old defense turret, his hands gripping the controls. Iliara's heart stopped. "Father, no." He smiled at her. "Go, my daughter. Finish what we started." And then he fired. The turret's energy blasts tore through the enemy forces, giving Iliara and the others time to reach the ship. Ethan pulled her onto the ramp as Riley shouted, "We have to go. Now." Iliara's eyes filled with tears as she watched her father hold the line. Then, the station exploded. Flames engulfed the platform. The relay tower collapsed in on itself, sending shockwaves across the moon. The ship blasted away just in time. A new beginning. In the silence of space, Iliara stared at the burning remains of the station. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. He knew what had to be done. She wiped her tears, her heart aching, but her resolve stronger than ever. Her father had given her a future. Jex's voice came through the comms. "We did it. The Zirak fleet is already in chaos. This is the beginning of their end." Iliara straightened. "No, this is the beginning of our rise." Ethan smirked. "What now, princess?" She met his gaze, determination burning in her eyes. "Now we fight." And with that, the ship vanished into hyperspace.